Hello and greetings from IIID Bangalore.
A very good evening, friends, fellow professionals, architects, interior designers, trade members, and students. On behalf of IIID Bangalore Regional Chapter, it is my pleasure and honor to welcome you all to the 7th session in the series titled Unmasked. Today's session is titled Impact of Education on Design. We have a pretty awesome panel lined up for you today. Our speakers today are architect Bijoy Ramachandran, partner at 100 Hands and design chair at BMS College of Architecture. Professor Srivathsan, director at CEP University. Dr. Smita Khan, architect at ACEDGE Architects and faculty at the Department of Architecture at VNIT Nagpur. And Akshara Verma, architect Akshara Verma, partner at ACE Group Architects and visiting faculty at CMR University. Today's panel will be moderated by architect Vishwanath, principal architect at Vishwanath Associates and board member of BMS College of Art. Our special thanks to today's event sponsor, ESPA. Mr. Rajiv, if you're in the audience, I would love for you to raise your hand and pop into the video share. Rajiv, are you there?
Second.
Rajiv is there.
He's there. Okay. All right.
Hi.
Hi. Thank you.
Hi,
so much.
Rajiv. Yeah.
Hi, how are you?
All good. Andre?
Yeah. Okay. So for today's format, we have, it's going to be a really interactive one. We will be asking questions posted by the audience to the panelists along the way. And I request all the panelists to keep the answers short and crisp. I request all the delegates to type in your questions in the chat box and mention to whom the question is directed towards. I would also request all participants to mute their microphone and avoid speaking directly to the panelists. Really important. Okay, so let's get this show started. Over to you, Architect Vishwanath.
Thanks, Andre. Before we start today's panel discussion, let's remain in silence to pay our respects to the great artists, Irfan Khan and Rishi Kapoor. Let's take a minute's silence. Thank you. Thanks, Andre, and welcome back. Welcome again to the panelists, IIID members, trade partners, students, faculty, and everybody online. Andre, can we have the expression? The
Yes.
first picture. When I asked my son, who's doing his final year in architecture, as to how does he feel about this topic of impact of education on design, he came up with these expressions. This is what he says he learned in the last 4 years. So looking at these pictures, we are now trying to get answers out of this and see how we can help the students. Well, my first question to the panelists are, the need of education in basic design, or is it an inherent quality of a person to practice design as an architecture or interiors? And specifically, it is pertinent because of the Supreme Court ruling on the unregistered individual not prohibited from practice of architecture, but they can designate as architects. I am also aware of a few talented people, not somebody like as huge as Satish Gujral and others, and have done extremely well in architecture, but they've not been educated in architecture. So how do we look at this question from the student's point of view and to make sure that the choice is education and everybody cannot be like the way yesterday's panelist was that Rajshekhar said he dropped out of 12th standard. So how do we take this forward? And we have a minute's video, 3-minute video from Habib Khan, the president of Council of Architecture. Can we have the video, Andre?
I'm very happy to know about this webinar on impact of education and design by IIID. IIID has been very close to my heart, and I've contributed and interacted and gained a lot from the platform. And I am sure that this webinar, series of webinars that you have planned will really go a long way in augmenting the knowledge base of our members and fraternity. In the light of the recent Supreme Court ruling, there is a lot of discontent, distress amongst our fraternity, and more so amongst the students, because they feel what is the need to learn architecture, study design, and architects feel threatened that anyone can come and practice their profession. I want to clarify one thing, that let us not take this negatively. Let us look at it from a positive point of view, wherein if you go through the judgment, the entire judgment of the Supreme Court, you will find that it's a very positive judgment, where Supreme Court has also said the plain reading of a certain clause in the Act stipulates that only title is protected and not the practice of architecture. And it has also made a remark saying that the whole purpose of the Act itself is defeated by a plain reading of this Act. We should use this judgment to have our Act amended, and we're also going to file an appeal in the Supreme Court saying that certain points, certain very pertinent and important points needs to be considered again in the appeal, and we are hoping that it will be reviewed sympathetically. But I want to tell and add one very important aspect which we need to think about, and that is the Act was 1972. Supreme Court and other high courts earlier interpreted what is written in the Act. So in spite of what is written in the Act since last 50 years, our profession has progressed and grown exponentially. And we are now a lakh plus architects, when there were only a handful of architects in 1972. There were about 10-15 schools at that time, and now we are more than 465. So the profession has grown. People are aware of the responsibility and the duties of an architect. People and the society at large feel that it is pertinent to hire an architect for their projects, be it a small house or a large complex projects. Even the government hires architects, and all this has happened. So there is nothing to worry about, no cause of concern. We are doing our job at the council. You at a practice level, at a professional level, at your own institutes, you do what you have been doing. You do what you're supposed to do. Excel in your profession. Make yourself indispensable to the society, and to all the students, young students, they should concentrate on education rather than worry about what the Supreme Court has said. It's not your job to worry about. We are there to look after it. I am very happy to.
Wonderful. That was a message from Habib, who's a dear friend. So let's not worry about the Supreme Court ruling. So Bijoy, can I open the discussion with you on your take on education, basic design, or is it an inherent quality, or do we mix both?
I think it's a bit of both, Vishwanath. This idea that the council needs to, or there needs to be a protection of practice is, I think, a bit short-sighted. I mean, familiar with like Peter Zumthor or Ando or whoever, Frank Lloyd Wright, people who never completed architecture school, the basic education, and have excelled in the profession. So I think on the one hand, yes, some people are gifted with the ability to spatially think of things. But then I think a basic education in architecture is also essential, because it introduces you to the mode of practice. It introduces you to the ideas of professionalism, at least a good education. And it also imparts the essential qualities that the thinking professional needs to have, as you come out and you operate in the world. So I think the education is important, but this idea that you would protect practice cannot be, the agenda without really looking carefully at our institutions and at the way that we are educating our professionals.
And also we cannot rule out education because, you know, engineering is so much part of architecture.
Yes, yes.
So that's something which needs to be taught. So a runaway success here and there may not be the real idea that, you know, we will, it's just the inherent quality. It needs inherent quality along with engineering. I think that's when, what do you think of this, Sri?
You know, your friend of mine once asked, why we haven't yet heard a prodigy in architecture, a born architect? You know, in that question lies the answer. Because design and construction requires training, exposure.
Right.
Okay, it could be any model. It could be an atelier apprentice model. It could be an institution education model. But design construction requires education and training. Now the question is, what is the role of an institution in that case? Now, institution is a commitment by the professionals to the society that they would train people with adequate competencies which the society can trust. The institution also makes education accessible. It fights indoctrination. It makes choices available. But that said, you also need a society which is discerning. Okay, without a discerning group of people, a community, you would not value design, or you would not value a trained and a good designer. So it works both ways. So yes, training and education are needed. Okay, and it's a commitment that we make to the society. Imagine otherwise how difficult it would be to train in large scale and so on.
Right. You know, yeah, pretty much right. Because I mean, we can't go the way the Chartered Accountants Association has gone and things like that. So I think it's very much required to have institutions to teach architecture and or interiors. So going to the next point, as education is the obvious choice for design, can the panelists elaborate a point each on the inclusion of a single point criteria for bachelors of design and masters and the required skill sets for the faculty? I think my second point is more important, more pertinent to today's world as to how do we look at the faculty, how do we develop the faculty, how does the fraternity help the faculty look at the students in a better way? Smita, can you take the question?
Sure, Vishwanath. At the UG level, I feel design education is like the base of a pyramid. There are multiple areas of study. So the field actually has a width, and there cannot be a single point criteria in architecture or design education. Yes, for a faculty, I must say some skill sets are necessary. Now, the faculty has to be one who loves to read, to reflect, to narrate, and maturing on to be a kind of a philosopher who is well-read, who can theorize, conceptualize, identify issues and concerns, and have an analytical ability to solve problems. There is also the ability to write, and a command which obviously requires a command on language. So here we are talking of the skill sets of a researcher faculty. Now that's not just enough, having a researcher faculty. So for a pragmatic field like architecture and design, we must have a look at faculty also who is trained in practice.
That's an important point. Yeah, that's an important point, what you raised. So yeah,
right.
What's
so
the kind
of
the number of years of practice, or is it they do their bachelor's, master's and join teaching, or are they required to practice for a few years? I mean, are there any?
I feel yes, for a few years, maybe 2 or 3 years also would be pretty good.
Right. Yeah, Akshara, you're young, you've been working with your dad and you're trained outside and you're also teaching. I mean, pretty serious teaching. So what is your take on this? I mean, how do you think when you look at your colleagues, your faculty, your co-faculty in your college, what is your take on, and what do we as professionals, or what do we have to do for the upliftment of all these teaching aids in colleges?
Yeah, I mean, I think it was very well explained actually by Smita. But I think also what I feel is, maybe if I could just add on to that, is that, our profession is constantly changing. So even if you look at the way architectural education has been imparted, for decades, there's been a huge shift from, the 90s kind of liberalized model and what the kind of architects we were churning out then, to now when there's this kind of, emergence of digital media and things like that. So I think there is that important factor for faculty to be constantly updated, to kind of strive to stay relevant in the practice.
No, Akshara, if you say that they have to be relevant today, are we looking at our colleges or universities giving enough development programs for the faculty? Do you have that as part of your curriculum for faculty development?
Yes, I think there is a lot of, there is a broadly an impetus given to faculty training in terms of workshops specifically tailored for faculty, so that they're also kind of exposed to, pedagogical methods across different schools. And there is a kind of exchange between professionals kind of coming in and academicians. So that is, I think an institution has to kind of constantly strive to do this, to make sure that their faculty remains relevant in the profession.
Sri, you have at CEPT, how do you go about doing this? I have this picture of CEPT where you conduct faculty training programs, and you also told me the other day that you also conduct faculty development programs for other institutions, not only for CEPT.
Yeah, I think it's important to stay abreast and also reflect and share best practices. It's your CEPT, but it could be any institution. So if you have something that you think is worth sharing, then you share. So second, constant update driven by motivation to keep your excellence up is an absolutely necessary quality for a faculty. You need a drive to be excellent, okay? And that's an inner drive. So in order to excel, then you seek out different avenues. Some you can self-learn, some you need some sort of an exposure, some you need some kind of a reflective space, a quiet space, etc. So as an institution, what do we do? It's good to say this, but how as an institution you support? One of the easiest things to do is, if you have something good, something worthy, then you share it. So the slides that you saw is basically what we have attempted at the Foundation Studio, which we think is worthy showing. So we have a moving exhibition. We are carrying it to different cities. We are sharing what we are sort of teaching. And we are also trying to discuss these pedagogic techniques with teachers who are interested in this. That's a small effort we are trying to do.
So is that, maybe is it one of the takes for the older institutions, say somebody like BMS or UBC, more locally in Karnataka or in Bangalore, who are now established for the last 40 to 50 years, should we hold hands or should we make an attempt from the profession to get the newer colleges and the older institutions together to see how they can share the programs and their experience? Is that a good idea? Is that what you're trying to accept?
Yeah, see, increasingly it's going to be a network of resources. See, no institution by itself will be complete. And also given the economics of education and the sort of the way in which the resources are scattered, not all resources can be at one place. So the more we network and more we share resources, the better it is for all of us. It could be many things. This is just one example. So I strongly advocate, and particularly in CEPT, we are rethinking, because we have been focusing on sharing or networking with universities abroad. We have a long history with that. But in the last couple of years, we are focusing more on networking with institutions within India and see how we can share our own resources. And I think it's absolutely necessary now.
Right. I think that's very important. Habib has a small, he has expressed his views on that. Can we have that video, Andre?
The council is looking at strengthening education at all levels. We are not looking at UG, PG, PhD or research as independent entities. To us, it's a continuous chain. First, in the olden times, only UG was more than enough to start a practice. Now, it's a time of more and more specialization and more specific fields which need extensive and intensive learning. So what we are doing is we are through the TRCs, which will be renamed into a much wider and a larger entity. We are going to hold hands of all the academic institutions, mentor them. We are going to do many things to improve the quality of education, where we are working in tandem with the new education policy. We are going to be NEP ready before anyone else, and I'm sure the kind of vision that the new education policy has will strengthen the design education, architectural education in general. We're doing a lot for the education and academics in general at the council, and it's very difficult to, put it in a nutshell in a forum like this. I can only say that we are looking at mentoring institutes, we are looking at holding hands, we are looking at capacity building, we are also looking at linking of the libraries, digitization of libraries across the country. We are looking at creating a platform for PhD research, and we're doing a lot of things in which basically we are taking faculty as a center, where we're trying to capacity build the faculty for being better teachers, and that is our main focus at the moment. The council.
Great. So council is also working towards the betterment of education in our country. Going forward, it's famously said we shape our buildings and thereafter they shape us. So what's the psychology of built spaces affecting our behavioral pattern of the public? More of an interactive forms for our nation. In light of the above statement, your thoughts on design education, like how does it affect the behavioral pattern of the general public? How is it taught in colleges, and how important it is? I mean, the business of education, the probability of people teaching, how important it is for them to teach the students. Bijoy, do you want to take on this?
Your question is how important design education is with relation to society? Is that?
Yeah. How does it affect the psychology of a person? I mean, when you go outside, when you in our own or society, or when you go outside, you see a building, and it kind of brings in different forms, your different thoughts, your behavioral pattern changes. So is there any thing which is done as interactive architecture?
Well, I don't know if I'll answer your question directly, but I want to just point back to something that Srivathsan said just earlier about also a sensitive, or I forget the exact term he used, but also, the people who actually commission architects for work, there's also a certain level of understanding or a certain level of exposure to, the notions of, the kinds of things that architects are, preoccupied with. And that conversation currently is quite broken, the conversation between how architects are thinking about design or thinking about engaging with society, and how society itself is looking back at architecture as some mode of decoration, So that, and Srivathsan, of course, has been writing at length, for the Hindu and various other places, in trying to make that bridge between what architects are learning and thinking about in terms of how they perceive architecture and its impact, and how society at large, that bridge is really essential. And so on the one hand, this network of colleges that are talking to each other and trying to develop pedagogy that then is effective, I think that's an important thing. But there's also another network, and again, CEPT is a good example of this, and this wonderful exhibition that was organized at, that CAF organized in Madras, to bring design conversation and design thinking into public space, into a conversation where everybody's engaging, at least looking at, what are these values that are important, or what are these values that people are talking about within, academic, institutions, about architecture, about history, etc. So I think on the one hand is a network, and the other hand is this connection out to society, which currently doesn't exist.
Yeah, the connect to the society is so important, because that I remember, some time back, one of them came up to me and said, "Oh, they looked at a balustrade and in a staircase, and he came up and said, "Oh, the architecture chennagillappa. This architecture is not very good." So the connect of the architects to the external world, I think it has to start from the education level. It is not just a design of a staircase or just something like as simple as they just look at it as saying that it is just an elevation we need from an architect. There's so many times when we were young, the people used to come up, just draw an elevation for me. It is okay. Let the plan be what it is. So I think the education has to teach. That's what my question was. How does it affect psychologically? That's what I was. Smita had something on that, right?
I entirely agree with the panelists and all that was spoken just now. It is just a bit of an addition at my end. I think we all agree that we have a rich variety of building traditions in our country, and it's so vast and complex. And every region has its uniqueness. So if we look at this dictum which is put forth by Churchill, that first we shape buildings and then buildings shape us. Yeah. We would like our buildings, their forms, spaces, materials, artwork, details to be contextual. So we can inculcate appreciation of values that every region has within those who use the buildings. That I think is kind of getting missing these days, because buildings themselves are not in sync with each other, and nor is the whole build in sync. So while we have a psychological way of looking at the problem that buildings have to be sustainable and comfortable for users, there also has to be this overlay of respect for its context. And I think this is going to instill a sense of identity and pride in the future generation. So I think it's a multi-pronged approach to what Churchill says.
Do you talk about this in your classes, Smita? You talk about the importance of, you do talk about this?
All the time. And in every subject kind of tends towards it, because I think that's a need of the hour now.
Can I just add one thing?
Yeah.
I just wanted to add what Smita just said. It's also not a one-way loop, that it isn't us trying to get out there and educate people about what design is. We are also getting information back from society about various things. And that engagement, sometimes in architecture schools, we're on this pedestal thinking that we know how to do things, and we get out there and we can't have a conversation with, our clients and with other people because we just aren't listening. And so that idea of putting stuff out there is also to get feedback from, society and from whatever, mechanism that exists to do that. So it's not it's not an idea that you just...
Absolutely. I mean, you hit the bullseye, Bijoy.
Absolutely.
I think we need to be good listeners. Right. I think we have to be good listeners to the end users. Yeah, we are not building buildings in the castle. So I think we have to be very good listeners. I think that's an important point. And let's move on to the next question on Akshara. Do you have anything on this?
No, I mean, I would completely just agree with everybody on this idea of engaging with the community. But as Smita also said, it has to be across, the different silos and not look at it as different silos in education, but with every subject that is kind of taught. So there is this kind of engagement with reality.
So Shri, what happens to students from SEB? They come in and say, wow, I'm already a Charles Correa or a B.V. Doshi.
Not really. I don't know where these stories come from. Can you tell me, Vishwanath, do you know who's telling these stories? Nobody. You please come. I'll show you the first year is almost like a boot camp. In a sense, it's a very tough training. Okay. And there is nothing like that. Of course, I sense the pride of having arrived in a good institution. And they probably sort of worked hard and came there. And they look forward to getting a good training. And nothing beats it like hard work. Reputation and all is later.
But I have definitely heard of these. I mean, not only heard, I've been, I've seen it myself when younger students come and say, oh, we are not going to design a toilet. No detailed drawings for toilets. The first thing they come up during training, they just don't want to touch a toilet, so they already, they are on a pedestal already.
Vishwanath, these days are days of fake news. So you should be very careful with whom you're talking to. So anyway, let's skip that, but nothing substitutes hard work.
Right. Now moving to similar to Council of Architecture, this question is more towards interior design. Similar to COA, do you all think we need a separate body to steer education and practice for interior design? And is India ready to create a niche for interiors while including architects as part of the fraternity? And we can have a governing body like COA and IIID can assist. So you think we should mature ourselves and go towards interiors, or should, because there are so many schools of interiors and IIID is doing so much to see if they can be brought under one umbrella. So how do we take it forward? How do we make it a course which is sustainable both financially as well as mentally, and how do we take this forward? To all panelists.
Can I start?
Yeah, please.
Okay, I think, you don't need more regulatory bodies, first. All
Really?
that we need is only light touch regulations. Second, if you look at the new or the proposed education policy, even council's role in future is going to be redefined. They will be only limited to be as a professional standard setting board. Okay, so the way forward is light touch regulation. In fact, interior design, I sometimes think have done well because they are less regulated. Yeah. So you have wide variety and so on. So what you need is a good professional body and a good connection between a professional body and institutions which are training. I think more regulations we don't need. We need only light touch regulation.
So you think the IIID should make a kind of a curriculum or just leave it to individual colleges? Because many of them start for their economical gains and whatever. It can be a business. But let the business be separate. But how is it that IIID can help?
See, I would always look at RIBA as a great model, correct? Of course, it has its own problems. But look at the way in which RIBA is shaped over a period of time. You know, for instance, in 1998, the UK government moved to completely deregulate architecture. So how well they sort of countered that attack on the profession. So I think there's going to be much achieved by a good, committed professional body, rather than asking for more regulation.
Got your point.
And second, politically also, in future, you will not get that because more and more light touch regulations. That's the language everyone is speaking.
Anyone else?
Yeah, can I say something?
Please.
Yeah, so I agree with Srivathsan, and we are seeing this challenge. I am on the board of studies at the VTU. I've just joined the board, and I'm finding it really difficult to be in a position where you're basically setting the regulations for whatever the number of colleges in Karnataka, where you're saying that en masse we're going to sort of regularize, the syllabus. We're going to regularize all the subjects. We're going to tell you, exactly what to do. And when we get feedback from teachers, we see that different places have different conditions, different challenges. Their orientations are different. Their emphasis is different in how you practice. And I wish there was some armature by which the schools had a little bit more freedom to move and to make their course in a way that reflects those conditions, so that the products of those institutions are in sync with those places. Right now, it's kind of this blanket regulation, which, we're just sort of throwing down someone's throat, and then people are really struggling to figure out how to operate. So I really appreciate Srivatsan's comment about this kind of, I don't know how it works. I haven't done any research on that, but how do you do this light touch regulation, where you're setting up some basic standards? Because what happens is also that then if you regulate heavily, you're only regulating kind of a minimum standards. You're trying to establish some kind of minimum standards, and that's all you're going to get, this kind of really banal kind of product. So,
can I answer that if you want?
Yeah, please. You had an answer. Yeah, please go ahead. Yeah.
See, one of the examples of a light touch regulation, which is also mentioned in the National Education Policy, is 2019 one. So from a compulsory inspection regime, we are moving into some kind of a voluntary accreditation at the beginning. So you voluntarily subject yourself to accreditation. Okay, based on your accreditation, then you get ranked or placed or positioned. And that will have a lot of bearing on your reputation, your ranking, your funds, and so on and so forth. So it is sort of self-driven. Now, what is happening is this regulation is sort of it's a smart thing. It's complacent. You think because council has certified you, you think you're an education offering good standard education. You only meet the minimum. That's what you do. So this is just an example I'm saying because you asked me.
Sri, you had something to say about the education in UK, the 3+2.
Okay. No, I thought I'd come to that little later.
Okay, little later. That's fine. Okay. A counter question to you, Bijoy.
Yeah.
VTU is a body of, I was also there on the board of studies, and we used to get more of their fraternity coming in who are engineering teachers and other things. So should VTU move towards having a separate university for architecture? Is that a good idea, or just we move out of all these universities and just give everything to the colleges to run the way they want?
No, I don't think I'm suggesting that we dispense with any kind of regulation at all. I mean, there needs to be some sort of an overseeing body that makes sure that minimum standards are met. But I have to figure this out. Maybe Srivathsan can guide us. But
my question was, do we need something like a VTU instead of bringing in all the engineering colleges, management colleges, and together?
No, we do need it. In fact, right now we are fighting that battle with VTU because all of their engineering final exams are now going to be held online.
Right.
And we are fighting, as part of the architects, a lot of the heads of department are saying that, these vivas, especially the thesis viva, we should try to do it face to face. And, there is certain sanctity to that engagement with somebody face to face. And also the fact that most of the design studios have no access to the site to do their work. And so it isn't really like an engineering theory course which you do online and you can sort of make do with that. Architectural education needs that engagement with the site, with observation, etc., which we are unable to do currently. And so in terms of schedules and these examinations, we're hitting a wall because the rest of the university is happy to do an online set of exams and conduct all their courses online.
Wonderful. So it's a good idea way forward to see if the fraternity can impress upon VTU to have a separate university for the architecture course itself. Okay. My next question is also something weaved around this. Your thoughts on a finishing school for architecture and design students before they start an interning in offices like us to help them overcome the difficulties during training curriculum. This is more to do with my own experience and experiences of my friends. When the students come in, we spend about 4 to 5 days, about a week, and there have been colleagues of mine who have gone out and started this training program for about a week in cafe coffee days and stuff like that to see how they can teach them the nuances of an office office curriculum. Is that a requirement? Smita or Akshara, yeah?
I mean, if you really ask me, I would say I wouldn't agree with that. I mean, I would think that, it is not really in the interest of an architectural institution or that academic space to really be focusing on, not churning out, but like maybe having, profession ready students in whichever stage of, their education that they're taking up professional practice. Because I think even the skill sets needed for an office will vary from office to office, workflows vary from office to office. And many times it is, the idea of having that professional training as a part of the larger curriculum is so that, they're kind of exposed to different ways of working, which I think students will definitely adapt to when they're in the office itself. So
but there is a growing tribe of youngsters who passed out of architecture and worked for a few years, who are working on training the students. So maybe we can just leave it as it is, because probably they will help them get the skills. Yeah. Srivathsan had something.
No, I agree with Akshara to the extent that I also don't think we need finishing school, but in a sense of admitting the failure of the institution not to train adequately. But however, I don't agree that an institution can really make students practice ready, profession ready.
But this
Because
finishing school can be only for a week. I mean, may not be
yeah,
for a whole semester.
I'm coming to that. So the education moves between academia and practice. Okay, so there are certain things which an academia can do, or certain things which the practice can do, and both should train. So the education is not complete within the institution; it continues for this year. That's here. It is at this point I just wanted to mention that some of the other education models are wrong. See, where you have a, for example, if you take UK model of 3+2+2, which is 3 years of undergraduate. So the undergraduate degree is a broad, it gives you a broad understanding, a liberal training, and also gives you skills. Then you go out, you work, and then you figure out actually exactly where you want to go. Do you want to shift course, or you want to do something else? And you also get the a deeper professional training there. And then you come back to academics, then your journey in the last 2 years is different. Okay. So now, because see, the demands of the kind of learning in an institution is slow. It's iterated, and it's deliberately slow because these are trainees. Okay. But in a learning in a practice is fast. It's very vertical. It's not, okay, sorry, it's more horizontal. That is, you try different solutions at short time and so on and so forth. So the demands of practice and the demands of academia cannot be put together. So one sort of moves between both two fields to train. So if you're training, if you're doing finishing school, that doesn't make sense. You rather have office experience or industry experience. That's a lot more enriching in value.
Well, what I was only suggesting was between a college and you enter a training program. Anyway, you have anything on that, Smita?
I can't agree any less than what they are saying. That's quite true. We don't
Man,
really need this bridge of.
You guys are ganging up.
Vishwanath, you invited us, okay?
So it's 4 against 1. Yeah.
I feel like maybe we are missing something, and that I need to attend one of those coffee I mean,
yeah.
because maybe
our CCD. No, I will text you some of these who are doing this, and maybe you should just walk in and see what they're doing.
There was a.
I love the CCD venue and all that. You know, it's
yeah, it sounds good in the CCD. Yeah, you're right.
We'd invited an Irish architect, an English architect, an Irish architect who works in England, and his name is Neil McLaughlin. And he'd come and he said something really interesting about this idea of architecture school as a preparation for practice, where you're kind of limbering up, flexing, and then once you're out there, you start practicing. And in fact, what he said, he thought of architectural education as if it was also a mode of practice, a mode of engagement. And so the way that these units were structured, they were structured in a way so that they prompted you to operate in certain ways, that your response to these, what the unit was asking you, either a contextual situation or a programmatic situation, that it was testing you to check how you're going to respond. What are the tools you're going to bring to bear to respond to this, stimulus that the unit is posing for you. And that's a wonderful way to educate someone, because it means that you're preparing them to come out and deal with these situations which you can't really anticipate. There could be all kinds of things coming at you as practice, either as a staff member or as someone who's running practice. And so really he was talking about education as a series of these scenarios in which you practice, in which you actually run a way
where you help the students to practice. Yeah. Sure. Andre, do we have any questions? Can we take some questions or?
Yeah, we have a whole bunch of questions, but I think we'll just stick to one question, maybe. That's okay, we'll just keep it short. So this question was from Arjun Marvaha and from Puneet, which has the same intent. Don't we require a body to govern and uplift the quality of teachers and professors? That's from Arjun. And from Puneet, it was architects can be good designers, but not everyone are good teachers. So having a kind of crash course prior to their teaching careers with experienced mentors might improve the quality of teaching. This is to everyone.
Absolutely. I think Sri, you should go with it. Sri, Smita.
You know,
Akshara.
this as discussing something back. We always think the seed is important, which is the student, okay? But sometimes the field is actually important. So the institution has to be a good institution which nourishes and helps student build, for which faculty are the key things. Infrastructure is only secondary. If you don't have good teachers, no matter what, your college and training will not be good enough. So the challenge always is recruitment. In SEPT, I've recruited some from senior people to junior faculty. Spotting the talent is absolutely difficult, and finding good talent is even more difficult. So it's a challenge. It's not easy, and particularly difficult in these days, particularly in Indian colleges, to recruit at the level of professors. We hardly get great talent. Having said that, if you're starting a college, better get some good teaching talent. Now, how do we know? What is the evidence that he or she is a good teacher? How do we know? It's a quick solution that you need training, etc. I see merit in that suggestion, but that's like another degree. So what we need are evidences. So for example, if I need a teacher in history and theory, I want to know whether this person has an appetite to read, to write, to reflect. That's important. If I need a teacher to teach design, I want to know whether the person is either practiced in himself or herself and has certain strong views about it. So there are different metrics. We need multiple metrics to judge a good teacher. But irrespective of what you teach, you have to be a good communicator. You have to have empathy. You have to be absolutely a generous person. These are some very basic traits to be a teacher. If you're not, no matter what, you'll be a miserable creature. You'll inflict so much pain on students. You should read our online anonymous feedback sometimes. You really get to see what happens there. So I completely agree. We need good teachers. We have to find a way of how to train and spot them.
Right, Andre. I think we've answered that.
I hope so.
Yeah. Okay. The next question is to you, Sri. You have a wide experience in various top-notch universities in India. Though you're not wearing a hat now, you wear a hat at, you practice, you write, you are a researcher. And going forward, what is your thought process for the opportunities for the student community? Vis-a-vis the inclusion of, say, they need not be in the realm of just design or practicing architects. So are we also teaching the students on architectural journalism, photography, storytelling, film designs, film set designs, strategy, planning, and stuff like this? So are we also helping the students to go into different fields in the realm of design and just not practice?
See, here I go back to my early point on this 3+2 model. See, what happens is the current system of education is primarily oriented to training practitioners, which is perfect. I have no issues with that. But the whole point is after 2 or 3 years, because, given our limited exposure in our 12th standard and so on, when someone comes into architecture course, by end of the second year, third year, somebody decides that this is not exactly what I want to do. There is no way there is an opportunity for students to move out. So 2 institutes today in India offer an exit program. One is the SPA, another one in Delhi, another one is CEPT, where after 3 years you choose to quit, you get a BSc degree or something like that. Because,
that's nice.
Okay, now leave the quitting, that sounds like a failure, but let me frame it more positively. Suppose if I want to shift journalism or research, or even what you said, photography or whatever, should I wait for 5 years and then move? I well know by third year I can't. So I have a problem in the current system, and I'm one of the strong advocates of the 3+2 or the 4+2 model. because the current system does not have those kind of flexibilities.
Right.
Yeah.
So flexibility is the key, and you guys have already started with it, and it is for the others to take it forward, other colleges and institutions to take it forward.
No, this is a larger system problem. Institutions, because we are a university, we are in so our case is difficult to repeat, but you know, it's a larger system question, and people have to reflect.
Yeah, what is the scene in NITs, Smita? Because your selection process is so different from NATA, and given the kind of students that you get who are more oriented towards science, I presume, though for an architect, both the left and the right brains work the best. They are more oriented towards science, but it's also a good idea to have a variety of students, isn't it? You have some pool from NATA, some from NITs and IITs, and maybe some of these kind of students go towards research. So how has it been teaching? You run your own college along with your husband, with hubby. When you see the students, or you see your own children, and where you go to teach NIT, how different is it?
Yes, there is definitely a marked difference. When the JEE process students started coming in, we did find that there was a sea difference in the students that came in before and the ones that came in after, because these students are the ones that come from basic science or a math background. And there's of course a little bit of drawing and visualizing capacities that they build to be tested for the architecture paper.
Well,
but by far these students...
One moment. You mean to say it has changed now for NITs? It is the same,
No, it is
right?
the IIT JEE.
It's the same.
It came in sometime in the middle. Before that, it was different.
Go ahead. Yeah, sorry.
So by far, these students are the kinds that like fast track. You know, they are the ones who come in expecting that you know, the course is going to be very fast. It's going to be very technology oriented, and whatever they learn, they are really going to apply the next day. So, but this is really not that happens in architecture. First, it's a very long course. So,
do they
attitude that I see.
Do they sit in your classes of history of architecture?
They do. Sometimes I feel by compulsion.
Okay.
They are the ones who are the types that like quick questions, quick answer, and there is the QED. So when the course of architecture starts unfolding, and then they start seeing the multifarious inputs that are coming in from different teachers and different streams, there is sometimes a very deep distress in some students, not all of them. And then every year somebody wants to drop out, and if they can't drop out because there's no exit program in the NITs, just as Srivathsan sir pointed out right now, we have no exit program. So if someone has to stay, then he takes a hard decision and stays. But then you know how bad the whole thing goes. You know, the student really scrapes through most of the courses and gets like a DD grade and just wants to just go through. Then there are some of these very brave and confident students who drop out. And I think sometimes that is for good, because even if they don't get a diploma or a certificate for dropping out, at least the years are saved. The rest of them just continue on. So at least for those people, there needs to be some kind of a counseling or guiding. That architecture is a little different from the engineering courses. I think they just come without this orientation.
Oh, you're telling me this. You know, in our family, we have family of all science students. And I was the only one who joined architecture, and they said, oh, what are you drawing and wasting your time for, and doing history and things like that. So I know exactly how the science mind works. But now, of course, they are happy. I mean, that's what happens. Akshara, you are young and you have joined a young college to teach. And how has it been? How has your experience been, and what is the overall growth of a young college? I mean, when the students come out of the young colleges, what kind of confidence that you pump them up with, and how is it to be in a new college?
Yeah, so I mean, so I see that there are kind of two parts to that question.
Though you have a Bhishma Pitamaha with you in the teaching.
That's right. So I mean, actually, if I just narrate, so I was back in Bangalore, and I'd worked outside for a while, and I really wanted to, you know, I'd also understood that, the discipline of architecture somehow needs this kind of constant touch with academics. So he was the Bhishma Pitama was the person that I actually contacted, because he was my HOD back at RV, to ask about teaching in general. And then to join a new school was very interesting, because I remember that first conversation that we had, and it was interesting because everyone seemed to be kind of thread together. It was, I mean, it's its own university. So in that sense, there was a lot of acceptance of, kind of challenging the status quo of, the syllabus, and really kind of molding things around differently. And it was also kind of tied together by an attitude towards kind of making or construction, which I thought was very interesting, to look at as a kind of, a stand or a base for pedagogy itself. So
no, I was looking at more on the psychology of the students who came to the newer colleges.
So I think, it is a bit different, I suppose, from students who join CEPT, who are, there is already this this notion of
I'm a doshi.
Yeah, of achievement, which is rightly so. So we do see a lot of students who are coming from multiple backgrounds. A lot of them, their exposure to architecture has been largely from real estate. I'm not sure, like first page of the newspaper where, with large skyscrapers and things like that, right? So you get students from various, with very, very varied understandings of what architecture is. I think this idea of NATA being the kind of entrance exam, and maybe coffee day style coaching for such exams as well, right? So the idea of NATA not just being a test of aptitude, but something that you have to train for, right, is also something very different from, just not very long ago when I was in college. So in that sense, and I think a very quick change that I also see, having been involved with the university from the second year to now, is that you're constantly dealing with more people. So the school literally grows by the blink of an eye, right? And and then you have more and more people that you have to kind of get into your own confidence and
do you also get parents coming and talking to you on the newer colleges, and how is it to be in the new college? Are the children safe and stuff like that? Do you get some questions like that?
Yeah, I think the parents are a lot more involved than before. I mean, I don't know if this is a generalization, but I think there is a lot more kind of
but your dad was involved completely.
With my education, not much at all.
No, with us.
Yeah, so I think, as a to talk about accessibility, I think has also really changed over the last years. And being maybe younger faculty, I think there is this idea of, you relate more perhaps to the student. People are, generally ask you a lot more questions even outside of class hours, which I think is healthy, and your access to information is almost the same, whether you are a student now or a faculty. So your role as a faculty member, merely being a facilitator, I think has also become a lot more important, because
so you're actually enjoying, and it's growing well. Because you seem to be enjoying, and we've seen some of your works. Can you? These are the works for your students, Akshara?
Yeah, so these are works from the school. So like I was trying to explain, so a lot of work actually goes into the kind of material understanding. So how is it to engage with something that is tactile? How is it to engage with how do materials really tend to behave? What is warp? What is weft? How do you understand structure through the act of making? So I think that's something that's very important for actually the school. So to make would be to then measure, to then test. So we really tend to kind of understand. The students are encouraged to kind of understand design through the process of materiality itself, as a very primary idea of the school. So the jugglery of the syllabus with respect to this kind of material understanding versus the technology, building technology, versus this ambiguous bubble of design that everybody.
Sorry, Akshara, this particular slide is very interesting. I have hardly come across at least in my times, we didn't do this. Are they building footpaths or roads? Are they your students?
Yeah, so this actually was a part of a workshop. Interestingly, also the school kind of comes together for 1 week, and it's the students of all classes actually. So so that kind of come together to build something 1:1. So this was the 3rd edition, I think, of the workshop, where they were kind of encouraged to use material, cob, earths, and really kind of go beyond orthogonal drawings to kind of to build something 1:1 with their bare hands. So they're actually like kind of
do they also source the materials, or
so it's
they finalize on the materials?
Parts of it are given, of course, and another part of it does involve them kind of talking to where the material comes from, finding out its pricing, and things like that. So
that's interesting.
Yeah.
That's interesting. That's very nice. So they have this hands-on education kind of thing. They design, they buy the materials, they finalize what kind of materials, and then they go ahead and build the place.
And build it, yeah, absolutely.
Nice. So, that's super. Yeah, Bijoy, the next question is for you. Yeah. Your experience on the impact of education on your growth as an architect. You've been a buddy in our, I've been a little senior, but you're from a well-known college locally from BMS in Bangalore. And how was it to go to an internationally acclaimed university and now running a successful practice? And what is your take for the next generation?
Well, just to recapitulate my time in BMS, of course, we had some lovely teachers like Mr. Dubey and of course, Mr. Dinesh Verma. I can't ever forget building construction classes with them and design with them. Siddharth Majumdar taught us in the first year. But more than instruction or formal instruction, which is why I think, this question about what kind of regulation, how do we set syllabus, etc., is kind of, I'm a bit torn about that, because for us, it was a very, very loose 5 years. We mostly learned from each other, from our seniors, from our juniors. It was, Brian Eno has this wonderful term for it called seniors, that we are moving away from the age of genius, where the solitary genius creates the great masterwork. And we are in a time where collaborations actually make the masterwork. The scene makes the masterwork.
Right.
And so BMS was a great preparatory ground for that kind of understanding that the big idea, the masterwork doesn't come from me. It's not my prerogative. It's not the burden on my shoulder. That it is really to be looking around to share, to come together. This idea of shared knowledge, conversation with the base group yesterday. How do you learn from many people so that you can then deploy this information in a sensitive way, in your own way? So that, I think, BMS was fantastic that way. We worked almost all 5 years. We participated in NASA, which was the main focus of our work. The 5th years would mentor the 3rd years, and, we would produce. And when we were in the 3rd year, we won the, NASA trophy for GSEN, a huge sort of victory for a provincial college like ours, compared to the big colleges from the north, etc. And all of it coming through an exchange between the students. So as an institution, that's the other thing. Teachers, of course, all of that infrastructure. But also, how do you create an environment that then fosters this kind of shared learning between the peers, between students? So BMS and MIT were both similar in that sense, because you were looking at your peers, learning from each other, but also having the freedom to choose directions as you see fit. And BMS gave me that freedom, as did MIT. So I think it was a nice, to be a little facetious, it was a nice preparation for MIT. BMS was just perfect.
Wonderful. Nice to hear that about our college. Yeah. Going next, Andre, do we have any questions to take?
I think we'll skip this round. We'll go till the end.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. The next is to all the panelists. You're well aware of the education system for a master's program in architecture in premier institutions in India and abroad. How does a master's program help, and how do the youngsters choose a program? I think it's pertinent and important to address this as to how do they choose a program. I mean, many of them come up to ask, how do I choose a program, or is it's left to themselves? So A, the master's program, and the second, how do they choose? These are some of the famous institutions, both in India, and the top left-hand side of the Priyadarshini College in Nagpur, and then we have the second and the third slide of BMS, and the third one is from Delft University, Netherlands. So what kind of universities and what kind of master's program they should choose?
I think by the end of your undergraduate, to a certain extent, you're clear as to where you want to move towards. Okay, and I normally would suggest that a year or two break in terms of experience would help. And in fact, in CEPT, we give some 15% weight for those with experience. Because we assume that time is necessary for reflection and also to test where you want to head. Now, having said that, there are two kinds of master's program. There is one where you sort of laterally move to a new field, with something new. For example, if you're an architect, you want to be an urban planner, then that's a relatively new thing. You have a broad sense, but you need to start from the basics and fundamentals. Or for that matter, conservation. You think you know it, but it has its own, knowledge base and training skills. Now there is another kind of master's program where you deepen yourself. For example, you want to do a master's in architecture design. So that's a big question. What is the difference between what you've learned in undergraduate and what you would probably learn in a master's program? So, so there are two different criteria one needs to think through. Okay, and much depends on where you want to head. And you normally choose a college based on its not only course content and its course structure. You look at people who teach. Right. Suppose you want to go do a master's in architecture design. You want to know who your design tutors are, correct? Because you are searching for certain kind of excellence in design. So whether you've been given that environment and opportunity, you need to test that. And what is the infrastructure and resources an institution has for your master's program is absolutely necessary. For instance, let's say you want to do a master's in history and theory. Correct. So whether it has a strong research and a writing program incorporated into the history and theory, then pick it. Otherwise, don't do it. It will be a waste of time.
Wonderful. Smita and Akshara, all three, the rest of the three panelists, and Smita, to you, you graduated from India and you went abroad to do your master's. And then, of course, you've done your doctorate too. How different was it? Learning and how different is it in your master's program between the Indian education and education outside?
Yeah, that's now almost 2 decades back, but I'm sure things haven't really changed to that extent. It was a sea change, and the first 5 years you're closeted in an institution over here, which has a certain way of thinking, and then you go all the way across the world and just everything changes. So not only was it the course that was different and the way we were supposed to, the vision widens out because you have so many students across the globe. I think that is what was more larger learning experience than exactly what our tutors taught us in the university. It was the peer and it was, yes, and it was the lateral connects that we had in the studio, which I think I learned more at that end. So that's a whole difference, yes.
Yeah. And what about you, Akshara?
So, I mean, for me, so post undergrad, I actually worked in Bombay with Samira Rathod for a while, almost 2 years. And at that time, actually, I kind of got
These are your pictures. Delft University.
That's right. That's right. I mean, so there, I mean, it was actually at work, you know, I really like kind of value that time in Bombay very highly of, you know, the amount that it kind of made me grow. And it was there in Bombay that I actually applied to this school. So it was the Berlag, which is actually a small independent school that had shut for a while, then reopened inside of the University of Delft. So it was kind of seeing a second birth almost. And like Smita said also, I mean, it was doing a master's program was a kind of eye-opener in many ways. It kind of exposed you in many ways. It was a bit intimidating sometimes. I mean, this orange room, I remember the first time you're sitting there and watching people that you've read about and, you know, completely soaking in its experience. And then the same time that master makes you stand there in the front of a large audience and present to everybody. So in some sense, there's this kind of almost, you know, you start to look at it in a very flat, very democratic manner, this space and this freedom that you've suddenly been given. And I think it's really a phenomenal experience.
Yeah, are we doing enough in the sphere of education for masters for in our country, Sri?
Yeah, I think the undergraduate degree to a certain extent is sort of stabilized, because stabilized meaning I'm not saying I'm quite happy with it, but sort of the structure is there. But masters is really a problematic area, primarily because I think there is less clarity as to what you want to teach, how you want to teach, and more important is both the resources and teaching faculty. Because you can't deal with masters just the way you deal with undergraduate. Because students come seeking for certain things. I'm assuming they're coming to sort of find some excellence. So we need to offer it. So there is a lot of, you know, there's an equal commitment that you have in postgraduate as you would have in undergraduate. So, and also to do a postgraduate depends on what discipline you want to offer. I mean, what program you want to offer. Let's say you want to offer a master's in conservation. Do you have conservation people in your group? Is your city having some conservation people? Do you have access to some conservation architects? Are you having a lab at your place, or can you access a lab yourself? All that matters. So it's not an easy thing. I mean,
so we are not except for a few universities in our country, we are not still equipped. Is that what you're saying?
I'll put it the other way. I'll put it like, if you want to start, you need a certain set of resources. And you need to have certain structure in place. So you need to ensure that you have them before you start. I'm not going to pass judgment on any institution.
Right. No, the question was more to do with post-COVID. Students going abroad would be a bleak scenario. I hear the universities outside are planning to have online classes, and students may miss out on the fun of being in campuses. So, are they now are some of them going to work, or are they going to get into universities? I'm not talking about the SPAs and the IIT and the CEP. I'm talking about the other universities. Are we ready to take students? And post-COVID, how are they going to how are they going to get over this situation? And we have Habib's video on that. Andre?
With the onslaught of the COVID-19 pandemic, a lot of issues have come forth, and one of the most pertinent and important concern that has come up is the postgraduate education in our field, where quite a lot of students go abroad, travel abroad for doing their postgraduate in various streams related to architecture. Now that option seems to be a little far away and a little far-flung because of the travel restrictions, because of the infection being controlled, and because of so many other issues, not only related to architecture, but education in general. So the question which is coming up in the minds of the students, parents, and other fraternity is, Are there enough schools for post-graduation in our country? Apart from the CFTIs like the SPAs or the IITs or a few other institutions which are well known for post-graduation, there are actually a lot of institutions in our country which offer postgraduate studies. But unfortunately, we have not been able to concentrate in our country on the quality of education of the postgraduate courses. Now time has come that institutes augment their infrastructure, augment their human resource, and have a relook at the way we are teaching post-graduation in our institutions. And with the
Oh, thanks. I think one of the things that probably the students will miss out is the peer group, the camaraderie, if they were to have online classes. So do we have, look at this, these are some pictures of, I'm glad there are boys too in this. And this is the picture in BMS and in MIT of Bijoy's, and this is a camaraderie. So this is something which we'll miss out in together in if we were to have online classes. You have anything to say on that, Bijoy? Online classes for architecture.
Well, not only the camaraderie, but the inability to visit sites and inability to register and observe things in the physical, in a physical setting. That's a huge loss. I mean, our PG students who are doing a study of the inner city here in Bangalore, we have no data now to develop projects or to speculate. You know, we are sort of really stuck in a way, and so that, of course, things are going to ease up, and we're going to be able to get out. I mean, you know, this is not going to go on forever. But the online course condition is not something that's really conducive to the kind of environment that I studied in or you studied in. You know, this. Both at MIT and at BMS, I learned mostly from my peers and from that engagement, which is, like Khan says, you know, an engagement where there is no ego. You're just sitting and shooting the breeze, and in that exchange, you learn about the world, you know. So it's not the teacher and the student kind of relationship. It's just a bunch of friends. So
great. I think the
also, I just wanted to respond a little bit to your question about the masters and about what Srivathsan said at the beginning. And there was a question in your chat box as well, that, you know, the idea that we have put a lot of emphasis in the way that we're taught that the designer is the supreme being, you know, that the individual who is creative, who can make the beautiful drawing, they're the great architects. And there are a whole bunch of people who graduate who are not great artists, who have different sort of, skills, who are great at administering or scheduling or developing strategy, or are very good with numbers. All of them sort of get sidelined in all of this, focus on design. And so Srivatsan's idea that it's kind of a liberal arts education where you get a bit of everything. If we can approach education like that, then when they come to the 5th year, then yes, they would be in a situation where they would be prepared to decide on what to focus on for their masters. Right now, it's just a potluck, you know. Okay, urban design, so let's do urban design, or these are the options, landscape design. You know, it's not. I don't think it comes from a deeper sort of understanding of, you know, either the profession or the focus or the academics. It's just kind of a rat race. So I think our emphasis on this designer as being the supreme thing, and then all of the other people who aren't, you know, that creatively skilled but have other talents, education somehow has to bring those to bear as well as important players in the creation of architecture, not just the designer. You know?
True, very true. I think you answered quite a few questions of these young students. Like, they need to introspect in themselves before they actually choose what kind of masters they need to do. That's what you were trying to say?
No, but it's also the educational institution. I mean, it's also the format by which you're sort of getting these people up to, you know, graduating without this super emphasis on the solo genius, you know, who's creating the masterwork. I mean, that seems to be this idea of studio where one person stands up there and presents his scheme and defends it up against a jury. It's such a flawed way to think of design, you know, because when you come out into the real world, it's rarely that. You're in a large group in a big room with a lot of people, and you're trying to negotiate. And it's really the collaborative skills that you bring to bear in that scenario. So how does design school bring that as the emphasis of your education? An ability to absorb information to assimilate it, and then to deploy it. That's essential.
Man, I think you have summarized the entire conversation. I think that's extremely important. Absolutely. Let's move on quickly to Srivathsan again on the research. You've done a lot of research on contemporary practices in architectural education. Do you see them aligned, Sri?
Absolutely. Because I think, see, the academia and practice are both an integral part of the discipline of architecture. Okay, so even if you're assuming for a moment, which I think it is not, let's say academia is more critical, reflective. What do they critically reflect? They reflect on practice. Okay, why do they reflect on practice? So that they add value to the practice and sort of contribute to the practice. Similarly, what do we teach? We teach practice. The design as not just an idea, but as a practice. So the alignment or the alliance, which is a better word, between academia and practice is absolutely necessary for professional education. No professional education can survive or even exist for a greater extent without the practice being part of it. Okay, now having said that, how do you facilitate? How do you make it happen when these are all great things to hear about? So as an institution, what is my responsibility to ensure these things happen? One, I can speak of my experience in ACEDGE, not that I'm saying that's the only way to do it. There are many other ways to do it. Say, for instance, we have divided the studios into units of 12 to 15 students. So if there is an 80 student, we combine 2 years, second and third, it's 150 students. At any given point in time, we have about 8 to 9 studios running. And these studios most of it are run by practitioners. And there are some studios which are run by full-time academics who also have interest and been inquiring about certain kinds of practices or some kind of speculative ideas. So here we create an opportunity to invite a lot of resource people. And a city like Ahmedabad is pampered for choice in the sense we have a good amount of practicing people, and I can see that happen. But what does it mean when you are in a smaller town where you have less number of practitioners? So this is where the institution should come in. You have to invest. You cannot, if you don't invest in your human resource, which are teachers and practitioners, you're not going to go forward. Particularly, some of the design students.
Can you quickly brief us on the CEPT Research and Development Foundation, Sri, and how is it helping the community or community of faculty or students?
Yeah. See, there are two kinds of researches it's done in CEPT. One, the individual faculty members do on their own, apply for grants, etc. We also have a time buyout scheme for individual faculty members. Apart from that, there are collective researches through centers. So we have many centers, and that slide shows you about 4 or 5 of them. And mostly they do research and advocacy work. For example, CWAS, it's a Center for Water Sanitation, has about a huge grant from Melinda Gates Foundation, and they're looking at sanitation and water supply in 2-3 states. They're doing some phenomenal work. They're training local bodies, etc. Developed a desktop and so on. CARPSI is probably the best lab in this country. I'm not patting my own back for energy performance. And they offer a lot of industry research. We work with industries and so on. The CAU which is the center I am part of, which I lead, is probably the youngest of them. And this is dedicated to architecture and urbanism. We have about a series of projects. One of the important tasks that we have set ourselves to is publish textbooks. And in this, we are trying to create opportunities to mentor researchers. I can speak for my center. All the projects are done by my team. We invite proposals and we invite research assistants. And as the funds roll in, we try to recruit or hire young researchers and mentor them in the process.
So these are the kind of models that probably some of the newer colleges should adopt if they go in for their research programs and stuff like that. So
maybe they have a better one. We should listen to them.
sorry, tell me.
No, I'm saying maybe some colleges have better ones too, so we can.
Oh, okay, that's nice. But
just to understand, Srivathsan, I'm sorry, Vish, I just had a question. So these entities are a private professional can engage with this entity to do research. Is that how it's structured?
Some of them are geared to, some of them are not geared to. For instance, in the center that I am part of, there are at least currently about 5-6 projects on the table awaiting grants, and all of them are not done by faculty. In fact, there are 4 or 5 are done by people in Ahmedabad, Bombay, and we are looking for more people to work with.
Mm-hmm.
The model is like this. You have a proposal, we shape the proposal, we pitch for the proposal, and it's part of my job and another team, endowment team. We go around the country asking for money, and once the money comes, we roll the project. And it's done by the person who proposes the project. We are open to
and students are involved in this work.
Students are involved.
And
yes, the students, we hire them as research assistants. If it's because there's only a limited time a student can spend, not more than 10 hours a week or less than that, because they have other things to do. So what we hire is we hire fresh graduates, or depending on the skills or skill sets or competencies we require for each project.
Wonderful. That was really nice. Let's go, Smita. I love this question because this is something which is now happening in my family too, with my niece and my son. My niece completing. My son is also doing architecture now. My wife. You have a successful spouse in architecture. Both your daughters are architects. And how is your conversation across the dining table? I think this is a question to both Akshara and Smita. Smita, can you take that?
I would say the dining table is hardly where we meet. It's because of COVID-19 that the dining table has come into action. But then it's the news that dominates the milieu of the dining table. But actually, architectural milieu pervades our lives in and out, and we are at peace with it. And in fact, we love it. And there are a few occasions where such peace gets disturbed. Now, it was actually, I'd like to tell you what happened when my elder one was in school. We had unanimously decided that both the daughters would be doing their undergrad in Nagpur itself, because we wanted them to stay with us for a longer period of time. So then between PADS, where Habib was involved, and the VNIT, which was a centrally funded institute, we decided on PADS because it was a building that we had designed. And then when Habib became the director, it was more like a holistic approach to design that was introduced. So we said, yeah, that's a place you should go to. This kid, the elder daughter, is very difficult in her teen years. And Abu is the director of a school. So every rule that he would make, she was the first in line to break. Now the school would encourage punctuality, and it would shut its gates at 9 a.m. because as a private school, they were really not able to control students. So when Habib became the director, he said, "Kuch to karna padega." So the gates would close at 9. Now this woman would be always out. And then, kya kehne bhai? There was communion at hand. There was merriment, discussions on fashion, movies, shows in the city. There was a CCD close by. All exploits were planned. That the director was at its wit's end. And at this point, I was only the mother. So every time there was a parent-teachers meeting, which also is something that he had introduced, I would fight I would just argue it out. You can't have these rules. It's a college, you know. So that was a worst part of our life when she was in PADS. And at least I used to argue that let the kids at least be allowed to attend. At least let them hear the teacher out. Otherwise, they're merrily straight going for the exam. And then copying notes out. And, you know, they are nowadays connected on the social media. So they think that's easy enough.
I'm glad Nagpur doesn't have pubs like Bangalore.
Then I would know where to find her. It can really get very difficult sometimes. So now that they have grown, both of them have graduated. The younger one just graduated. Now we are really friends. Now they are, and at that time there was another problem. Since I'm talking of friends, the problem both of them had was there was no one who wanted to be friends with them because they were directors' daughters. So on one side, you are on the wrong side of the director, and the friends don't trust you because you are director's daughter. So there used to be a lot of rebellion and resentment in those years, and then we saw them through all those 5 years. But on the what I can say is the flip side is a happy communion. Currently the elder one is setting up a fledgling practice, and we are able to help her out through it. And when she was studying at SEPT, I almost grew up again with her and almost did my master's again with her. So I think we're looking at it as a longer lease of our architectural life, both in practice and in academia with the new generation. So
wonderful, super, lovely. Akshara, what's your
actually, your question
husband being an architect?
No, your question made me realize something that I then was feeling quite bad about. Is that, you know, even when I was not in Bangalore, and that's almost eight years, I have somehow, coincidentally or not, always lived with architects. So in some sense, I've never shaken an architect off my back. So I think, yeah, whether it was an, you know, internship in Colombo and in Bombay, we were the entire office kind of living together in one crazy apartment. Coincidentally, the first roommate I had in the Netherlands was also an architect. And then I chose to, of course, live again with a bunch of my classmates, all architects, together when we were working. And then I came back, got married to an architect. So it's, when I thought about that, I was, you know, feeling a bit strange that I really should have, you know, what is this monocultural existence that I seem to have. But actually, I mean, having said that, I think architects don't make bad conversation. I think, you know, this, a part of our profession is that we're so kind of spread across, you know, we're such generalists in a sense that, you know, dinner table conversation is not necessarily, wow, this is a great building that I visited today, but it could be political or, you know, we talk about performances, arts. I mean, I think it's quite
wonderful.
A varied spectrum of things that you're able to kind of converse with. Though I really wish, yeah, I was just thinking that, you know, now my oldest friends, my school friends, are the ones who kind of have, you know, completely different takes on, you know, so probably I can't walk around a city and really have a great conversation with them, although they're my oldest and best friends, probably.
Though we go and though we want to say politicians' sons shouldn't come back to politics, we will always say architects' children should come back to architecture. I think that's the fun part of it. We are almost to the last question. Bijoy, this is for you. It's very, I love this designation, what you have, you know. And design chair, wow. Yeah. I mean, is it the chair which is just, it's a cushion chair, or is it a plywood chair? Is it hard material? Is it soft material? How does it feel, man? I love this design chair, you know, and I need to go back to Mamta Raj and tell her, man, do you have another design chair?
Well, it's just a glorified studio position. Sounds like a very fancy thing, but yeah.
Well, what is the role? I mean, how does a student get good information out of this design? What do you guys do as a design chair?
No, so I am involved with studio, just like, you know, other visiting faculty. I go there twice a week or thrice a week now because of you know, the other visiting faculty aren't coming. So I'm just.
Is this a design chair for bachelors and masters, or
for the masters only? For the masters.
Oh, masters only. Okay.
So on the one hand, it's just basically guiding one studio semester at a time, and on the other hand, it's sort of sitting with the rest of the faculty to do what you know, what Srivathsan was talking about, to try and structure a sort of holistic program that is looking at something in a particular way. So you know, there's a lot of emphasis in the program for, you know, observation and data collection and ways in which you represent information. You know, this is kind of our focus. So we are trying to develop the studio courses in a way to look at data and to look at information in a more sophisticated and more holistic way. So that, I mean, we're trying to do that. I mean, as a group of faculty, we're sitting together to try and figure out a way to go forward with the program under the VTU auspices, of course.
Lovely.
So yeah, I mean, it's just a glorified studio appointment.
Wonderful.
It's more
Yeah,
than
I think we are running out of time. And do we conclude, or we'll go with the question answers?
I think there's been a ton of questions. So if we
I
can
think we
maybe
should
just
take,
do a very crisp, maybe 2 questions, and then we can wrap up.
Sure.
Yeah.
so if you can squeeze a few questions, that will be great.
more. Yeah.
Yeah.
Squeeze in a little more. Yeah.
Yeah. So one question from Anshul Choda to everyone is to any of the educationalists or teachers, what is the biggest challenge you face when teaching students the profession?
I wouldn't say a challenge, but what I desire an intellectual curiosity and some kind of an eternal wonder of things around. So these are the two things I want a student in my class to have. Then your teaching just becomes so easy because the student is curious to know, and that's the task.
You're breaking up, Srivathsan. We didn't hear the last bit.
No, I'm saying that only the students will be telling you whether I managed to do it or not.
Right.
I think something that, I mean, if talking about a challenge, I think I realize that I have to sort of address, you know, a similar problem to different students differently. So I think that sometimes is a challenge, but I also do tend to enjoy it. So, you know, what is, you know, you have to kind of understand also, okay, what is a way to motivate this particular student, or how do you kind of get the best, or how do you try or attempt to get the best out of everyone? And often you find that the strategy cannot be the same.
Right.
So you're really kind of understanding each student very specifically as well, which is a challenge, but I think also an enjoyable one.
So making it very personal.
Yeah.
In a group.
In a group, yeah. Okay, so the next question, if I can jump, is from Gunjan Das to everyone again. Most architects feel a master's degree is not necessary for architecture. What is your opinion on this?
Sorry, can you repeat?
Most architects, as in students of architecture and very fresh architects, they feel a master's degree is not necessary for architecture. It's basically a master's degree versus the first 2 years of being in an office or being on site. You know, what do you have?
I think Habib answered that question. We are going more towards specific ideas or specific issues related to architectural design. So it is a requirement. It was not something required during our days, but now going forward, and they also measured in those years. It is just not for it's just not for going there to study the particular subject, but they, as we show, so much of camaraderie, and you meet so many people, and I think it is a requirement today.
I mean, more than the skill, it's also the camaraderie that you can kind of build on and take off.
Can I just answer that as well, Andre? Just a quick one.
Yeah.
I'll just in the context of my own master's degree, and if you were to go for a master's degree outside of your hometown, you know, for most part, architecture sometimes you tend to do with people you're familiar with, in a context that maybe you're familiar with. For most part, of course, people travel for undergrad as well. But masters, invariably, people are out in a place where, you know, it's an unfamiliar setting. You're in a group which, you know, is not familiar, and that, I think, is also a really essential thing. That because of that unfamiliarity, your point of view, the assumptions you make about people, the perspective that gives you, and it also forces you to define who you are, your own identity, your background. People ask, like when I went abroad, everybody asked me about Satyajit Ray, and I had never seen any of Ray's films. And I said, oh my God, you know, I have to see Ray's films because, you know, now everybody's going to ask me about Ray. And so it forces you to confront your background, start reading about your own. So in a way, it's a self-discovery as well. I don't know, Akshara, if that was true for you as well. But going abroad really sort of pushes you out of comfort, you know, and you're now having to define who you are, where you're from, etc.
So adding on to the same question, there was a question from Entorno who mentioned that, you know, why do we block someone who is good? So this is subjective because I myself don't know the requirements for faculty, but why do we block someone who is very good at architecture and design? He's also good in teaching, but he can't teach. Does he need to do a master's for it? Basically, I think what the question meant is, do you need to do a master's to teach in a university?
I think breaking up, yeah.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's better now.
So basically, a lot of people do their masters today to work as a faculty. Yeah.
It's the minimum requirement.
Yeah.
But going forward,
maybe you could shed some
they're
light
supposed
on
to do their they're supposed to do their doctorate for teaching to become a professor and stuff like that. I think that's a requirement.
See, the way to look at it is, what is the evidence of that you have the competency to teach, or you have the sufficient knowledge to teach? That's the question. So what happens is people fall on objective standards. So what they do is ask for a degree, ask for X years of experience. But you know, if you a rigorous recruitment process, I myself done it, and I've been part in different institutions, including IITs. The recruitment is probably one of the most rigorous processes. You check for the evidence. Depends on what you have been recruited for. Okay, so if your question is, what is the evidence that you are a good designer? That's what one is asking for, that you have the sufficient knowledge and expertise to teach. So if you don't have a degree, you show your work. Okay, if you're a great writer, show me your writing. Let me look at your book. So there must be some evidence. So we can dispense off with masters. I have no problems with that, but we cannot dispense off with credentials and evidences of it. So there should be some way I should know that I'm willing to take you in my institution.
So the emphasis on having a master's degree may be a cop-out, no, Srivathsan, where you don't have to then be as rigorous and you just go master's degree and get into teaching.
It's done in good intention. It's done in good intention. But what happens is, like many things, it just becomes like a checklist. It just becomes a tick off.
Yeah.
So you don't check, okay, if you're a master's person, do I look at what you have done subsequent to your master's? Can I test your what you've gained in masters? What have you done? I mean, you're not going to come from masters into my college. See, so you can't just come and teach. You should have minimum certain kind of exposure and experience to teach. Just the degree is not sufficient. So I completely sympathize with that question. I'm also, in a sense, willing to dispense off, but give me something that I know that you have that. I need something, isn't it? Because the interview is only the last part of it. So you send a portfolio, you send your CVs, you send your sample of works. There is all pre-process. But since the current situation, let's not get into it, but it's kind of gone a different track.
Andre, do we have any questions from the students or the faculty?
I can't really tell.
Really? I know.
Yeah, but yeah, I think you answered that question really well. I think we're running out of time, so we can conclude. If there's anything else you'd like to say.
The panelists have to say, how do you conclude?
Yeah.
How do you want to conclude?
Okay. So thank you so much, everyone. It was an amazing session, very informative. A huge virtual round of applause for our speakers today. You guys were great. So before we wrap up, a couple of announcements. Thank you, ACEDGE, IIID, and ESPA. Mr. Rajiv is here with us. We also have with us Mrs. Chantal Van Munford, who is ESPA's training head, and Cabral Dillon, Project Director of ESPA Middle East. A big thank you from all of us, IIID, BRC. The proceeds of this program are being used for relief measures to help construction workers and handloom artisans through NGOs, Wachi and Vimor Handloom Foundation. Anyone interested in becoming a member of IIID, please do get in touch with us, anyone in the community, and we'll happily put you in touch with the right person. Our next session is tomorrow morning. Remember, we have 2 sessions tomorrow morning. The first one at 10:30 a.m. is one of my favorites. It's with architect Shahrukh Mistry and Shamla Prabhu on design empathy. Later in the day, we have the young couple, architect Bhairav and architect Akshara from Leaping Frog Studio, talking on handcrafted interiors. So some power-packed sessions coming your way tomorrow. Remember to tune in and see you all in the next session. Thank you so much.
Wonderful. Thank you very much.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you.
It's great listening to all of you. Thank you so much.
Wonderful.
Thank you. Bye.
Thanks, Andre, for everything. Thank you all. Thank you all.
Bye. Bye.
Bye.